In 2020, I changed my name to Deeple from John Charles Julian Lennon. This woman's name has been whispered in documentaries and argued in conversations about the Lennon family for decades. Vogue.com requested a photo of her smiling immediately, which was odd and often ignored as a rock and roll footnote. John Lennon's eldest son sees a more difficult truth behind the headlines and speculation than most fans realize. Julian Lennon rarely mentions her. Julian Lennon was Renaissance guy. Recording artist, filmmaker, environmentalist, activist, and talented photographer, his current endeavor. Silence over guesswork. After years of silence, he has finally spoken, and his remarks aren't what anyone expected because sometimes the most surprising ally in a damaged family comes from the least expected place. These disclosures shock the industry and will surprise you. The heartbreaking journey of Julian Lennon. One woman's name has floated about the Lennon family story for decades, muttered in documentaries, argued in interviews, and dismissed as trivial in rock and roll history. John Lennon's eldest son sees a more difficult truth behind the headlines and speculation than most fans realize. Julian Lennon rarely addresses her, preferring silence to rumors. He finally broke his silence after years of constraint. His statements were unexpected. Because often the most unexpected ally in a broken family comes from the least expected place. Julian Lennon was born in Liverpool, England, on April 8, 1963, before media conjecture about his background in family history. John Charles Julian Lennon was the firstborn child of famed musician John Lennon and Cynthia Powell. Julian's early years were not glamorous, yet he was destined for fame. Fame destroyed his parents' marriage. After John Lennon started seeing Yoko Ono in 1968, they divorced, shaping Julian's childhood. Julian lived mostly with his mother, Cynthia, from the late 1960s to the 1970s, with little contact with his father. Julian perceived a quieter and more difficult legacy of John Lennon, one of emotional remoteness and desire rather than continual presence. Despite living far from his father, Julian shaped John's music. Paul McCartney penned Hey Jude to calm young Julian during the divorce's emotional turmoil in 1974. Hey Jules, a personal attempt to soothe the youngster trapped in adult dispute, became one of music's most cherished songs. English singer-songwriter renowned for ballet in Jude. Julian was simply a boy, yet his hardship shaped a cultural moment shared by millions, showing how his presence had powerfully affected those beyond him. Julian emerged from his father's shadow as an adult by creating his own musical identity. Lennon grew up in music fame. Obviously the older son of John Lennon, and his 1984 debut album, Valet, established his music career. Too Late for Goodbyes and Valet, the album's lead songs, reached global charts. Julian proved his voice was worth anything beyond being John Lennon's kid. His voice and writing style resembled his father. His attitude was gentler and more thoughtful. The music industry noticed. Julian received a Grammy nomination for Best New Artist in 1985, a year after his debut, proving he had crossed the legacy legitimacy threshold. This popularity led to his 1986 second album, The Secret Value of Daydreaming. He focused on consistency rather than nostalgia, creating credibility through steady output. His artistic growth continued into the next decade. Saltwater was Julian's 1991 breakthrough track from Help Yourself. His emotionally moving lyrics about love and contemplation made the song another career highlight. While melodious and calming, Saltwater showed maturity that set Julian apart from other musical legend successors. By then, he was no longer a past-shaped figure, actively writing his own. In the late 1990s, Julian left music to pursue other artistic paths. From 1998 to the early 2000s, he left the sector to avoid commercial pressure and public scrutiny. He explored photography and philanthropy to expand his creative horizons without sacrificing expression. This silent turn was an expansion, not an escape. Julian's break showed that legacy doesn't need constant visibility. He made the 2006 documentary Whale Dreamers, combining his artistic and ethical objectives. This extraordinary documentary film premieres in Australia tonight and has the globe talking. Julian Lennon produced an environmental initiative. Julian clearly linked creativity and responsibility with this attempt. This theme continued in 2009 with his photography collection Timeless. Instead of the microphone, he used the lens to express his viewpoint with the audience, valuing subtlety above spectacle. In 2010, he launched the White Feather Foundation, an environmental and social organization. The name mirrored his history and goal, reinterpreting spiritual meaning associated with his father for practical use. Julian used his fame to help communities and ecosystems in need. Julian returned to music despite his growing philanthropy. In 2011, Everything Changes was his comeback album. This endeavor marked a gradual return rather than recapturing early success. Mindful, mature, grounded. It showed Julian's creativity was not tied to popularity. It was his nature. His literary work developed between 2015 and 2021. Touch the Earth books for kids are his way of reaching younger generations. Discuss the book to your mother. You wrote a series of children's books called Love the Earth. The unexpected path did not differ from his previous operations. It made them stronger. Storytelling was passing on his documentary and humanitarian ideas of environmental awareness, worldwide empathy, and connection to nature to children. Julian taught through imagination and knowledge rather than protest or performance. One of Julian's most significant milestones was his 2022 single Imagine, which covered his father's classic hymn for the first time. He published it for Ukraine alleviation, not nostalgia or personal gain. It was a meaningful occasion. After years of navigating his father's legacy, the son finally accepted one of its most important elements. Instead of copying, reinforce its message in a new era. Instead of trying to emulate John Lennon, he walked beside him, appreciating history but remaining himself. Julian Lennon's loss, resentments, and issues despite his success and personal improvement, his history haunts him. A history that survived age and accomplishment. His connection with his father, John Lennon, has been one of the most difficult and agonizing parts of his journey. Though revered as a cultural figure and peace champion, John's involvement in Julian's life was not ideal. Julian has freely described their emotional distance and complex relationship in several occasions. To his great father, John. However, he's shown a sound. Fans saw John via music and advocacy, but Julian saw him through absence. He admits that he respected his father's work but felt neglected. After John had his second son, Sean, Julian saw a change in his father's behavior that favored his younger half-brother. He thought Sean received more attention, affection, and participation than he did as a child. That imbalance shaped his emotions and identity. Complications continued after emotional distance. John Lennon's death in 1980 left Julian with another personal issue, an inheritance dispute that would shape his early adulthood. Julian, John's firstborn, received a modest share of his father's wealth compared to Yoko Ono and Sean Lennon. The distribution caused emotional grief and public curiosity, forcing Julian to face his father's choices and their legal and financial consequences. In the 1980s, he negotiated for a fairer settlement. The procedure was fair, not vengeful. A clandestine arrangement was negotiated in the 1990s, but the facts were never disclosed. Even then, the experience showed how difficult it was to balance legacy as a public figure and a son attempting to reconcile love and disappointment. He struggled with public reputation as well as legal issues. Julian's feelings for his father's second wife, Yoko Ono, were often discussed in interviews and the press. He expressed displeasure about her control of John Lennon's estate and legacy, noting that his father's image and work were often decided without him. Julian claims he and Yoko are civil despite past difficulties. His approach is neither bitter nor emotional. It is measured because peace sometimes requires acceptance, not perfect agreement. He has shown in his own words that while history cannot be changed, respect can exist even in difficult situations. Beyond familial dynamics, public comparisons to his father have caused controversy and personal trouble. Julian's work was appraised from the start for how well it fit John Lennon's legacy. His voice, lyrics, and appearance were compared in headlines and interviews. Julian found the similarities burdensome, while others saw them as a praise. He said the urge to emulate others overpowered his efforts to develop his own. He was typically framed as a reflection rather than a unique individual. Not just music reviews carried that weight. It accompanied him everywhere public. Constant monitoring hindered creativity. Knowing that every artistic choice will be judged by legacy rather than personal expression. His private life was also scrutinized. Despite keeping his love connections and personal life private, tabloids speculated on his life based on his last name. Julian chose privacy to maintain peace, unlike some public people who thrived on notoriety. Even without him, rumors spread, presenting preconceptions as truths and curiosity as entitlement. Many superstars fight or withdraw, but Julian chose quieter resistance. Speculation did not define him. His controversy handling has always been modest. He acknowledges his previous anguish but refuses to let it shape his future. Pang's troubled legacy. During Julian Lennon's turbulent years of emotional estrangement, legal disputes, and public comparison, one character in his background gave something unusual: consistency without expectation. That person was MayPang, whose significance in John Lennon's life has been contested, misinterpreted, or distorted depending on the storyteller. Beyond rumors and assumptions, her past shows unexpected loyalty, not scandal-seeking. Pang was born to Chinese immigrant parents in New York City on October 24, 1950, before her notoriety. She had no idea she would become involved in one of rock's most intriguing and unique chapters from her multicultural working-class childhood. She entered music through hard effort, not fame or status. She started working at ABKCO Records as a receptionist under manager Alan Klein in the early 1970s and later became a production assistant. Her job wasn't glamorous, but she met top musicians and executives. Her hard effort earned her the chance to work with John Lennon and Yoko Ono on Apple Records projects in 1970 and 1971. Her administrative support became more involved as she earned their trust via reliability rather than ambition. She became John and Yoko's personal assistant in 1971, managing their increasingly complex schedules. It required professionalism and discretion because their lives merged personal expression with public performance. May herself could not have foretold the 1973 decision. Yoko Ono asked MayPang to date John Lennon when he was apart from her. This period was eventually called Lennon's Lost Weekend, but it lasted 18 months. Years of analysis, criticism, and sensationalization have questioned whether the relationship was based on deception, unorthodox trust, or emotional necessity. However, May and others reported that the relationship was not chaotic or risky. Interesting look into their difficult relationship. Okay, Sandy. Thank you. It was surprising domestic. May lived with Lennon in Los Angeles and New York from 1973 to 1975. Participating in his personal and artistic life. She managed his recording sessions, including the albums Walls and Bridges and Rock and Roll, not only as a companion, but as someone who knew his moods, rhythms, and creativity. By encouraging John Lennon to reunite with his estranged son Julian in 1974, she may have defined her relationship with him. While many in John's immediate circle focused on his public persona or artistic ambitions, May recognized the need of healing internal traumas. She helped restore a broken father-son bond by organizing early visits. These meetings helped Julian, who had spent his boyhood seeking recognition, comprehend the man behind the mythology. This was where May's role went beyond tabloids. She was more than a romance partner, she helped people recover during a time when few cared. The chapter ended, though. John Lennon ended his relationship with MayPang in 1975 after reconciling with Yoko Ono. There was no scandalous aftermath or chaos like many public separations. May quietly moved back, respecting John's decision and carrying her experiences into her next phase of life. She worked in music in the late 1970s and 1980s, transitioning to artist management, photography, and licensing. She chose to create her career independently, acquiring abilities based on her expertise rather than her former affiliation with Lennon. She married Tony Visconti, a noted music executive who worked with David Bowie, in 1983. The marriage ended in divorce. However, it brought stability to her eccentric life. May also produced image collections of Lennon from their time together, which some viewed as capitalizing on the past but others regarded as her right to offer her perspective after years of conjecture. These photos of Lennon's Lost Weekend showed laughing, dogs, gentle domesticity, and calm, disrupting controversy instead of increasing it. Almost 3 decades after her breakup with Lennon, MayPang published her memoir, Loving John, in 2002. The book was neither revenge nor tabloid exposé. This personal story clarified rather than condemned. She wrote honestly about her experiences, acknowledging the complexity of her role and the humanity of her lover. She controlled her story for the first time. In 2008, she published Instamatic Karma, a collection of Lennon's intimate images from their relationship.
The photographs were chosen for realism, not shock value.
Their genuine moments disprove the idea that the lost weekend was chaotic.
But the photographs showed stability, playfulness, and calm.
The Lost Weekend, a love tale documentary, reconstructed her time with Lennon via her lens in 2023, reframing decades of speculation. The documentary challenged a narrative controlled by outsiders and critics. Instead of playing victim or disruptor, she portrayed herself as someone who cared for a man who wanted clarity, not adoration. She reintroduced herself to a world that had previously treated her as a footnote, MayPang's allegations and concerns. Due to the unique circumstances that led to her connection with John Lennon, MayPang's tale has long been controversial, despite her influence on his life and career during the Lost Weekend era.
Pang claims that Yoko Ono planned the affair, not secret seduction or betrayal.
Pang has maintained that Yoko personally encouraged her to start a romantic relationship with John when their marriage reached a difficult phase, insisting she would be a good companion for John during their separation.
This revelation has sparked controversy among fans and historians over whether Pang was misled or whether she willfully entered one of rock history's most convoluted love triangles. Some say Yoko's involvement absolves Pang of blame, while others say she still engaged in marital interference. Public opinion of Pang was further muddled by media coverage.
She was often seen as the other woman instead than a helpful person who helped stabilize Lennon during a difficult time. Tabloids depicted her as a fling in the Lennon-Ono love tale rather than a serious companion. Even though Lennon subsequently said the missing weekend was one of his happiest, complimenting Pang's quiet, productivity, and emotional clarity.
Still, people saw what they wanted.
Pang became a side note in John and Yoko's story, either dismissed or reviled, rather than a key figure in Lennon's latter years. Even decades later, her contributions are generally discussed in terms of controversy rather than companionship, making them impossible to evaluate. Pang also alleges that her departure from Lennon was not as clear-cut as reported.
She said that Yoko Ono actively intervened to bring John back to her.
Pang claimed that Ono deliberately kept them apart after John moved back in with her, limiting communication and access. Lennon expressed intentions to stay in touch or even rekindle their relationship, but Yoko's influence prevented this. These acts, whether motivated by jealousy, possessiveness, or a desire to safeguard her marriage, contributed to the impression that Pang was forced out of Lennon's story. She insists that Lennon still loved her after returning to Yoko, adding to the emotional complexity of this chapter. Years later, Pang published books and appeared in documentaries, sparking another debate about her ability to discuss her relationship with Lennon.
Yoko Ono's supporters and some casual onlookers accused her of profiting from Lennon's legacy.
Her memoirs and photo collections were seen as marketing stunts to reignite a romance.
Pang denied such claims, saying she wanted to authentically record history from her perspective.
She claimed that her role would be misinterpreted or omitted if she kept silent.
She saw expressing her tale as reclaiming, not exploitation. She said she had kept photos, letters, and first-hand accounts that showed Lennon at his most playful, carefree, and emotionally open. Pang shared her experiences as an homage, not controversy. Julian Lennon speaks truthfully about MayPang. MayPang's position in John Lennon's life has been debated for decades, but one chapter is difficult to reject. Her help in reconciling John Lennon and his firstborn son Julian. At the time Pang entered Lennon's life romantically, his relationship with Julian was strained by years of alienation and confusion from his breakup with Cynthia. John had not seen Cynthia in years and had only occasional touch with Julian, according to Pang. Pang met Julian while working as John and Yoko's assistant at Tittenhurst Park and immediately felt responsible for the boy. Due to popularity and familial strife, their first meetings were innocent.
Playing on the grounds, riding golf carts, and spending quiet time away from celebrity life. That early familiarity laid the groundwork for something more substantial.
Pang saw an opportunity to fix history when she started dating Lennon in 1973. She advised Lennon to start reconciling rather than accept the emotional divide between father and son.
She assured him that she would guide the procedure.
Lennon, who had hidden his remorse under work, distractions, and denial, agreed.
Instead of a spectacular gesture, targeted personal efforts followed. A hesitant but meaningful reunion began when Pang encouraged Lennon to welcome Julian and Cynthia for the first visit in years. In 1974, when she and Lennon moved in together, she made sure their New York house had a spot for Julie and his family. Pang clearly wanted a life with Lennon based on responsibility, not romance. Julian later reflected on how different his father was throughout those years. John seemed happier with May, he remembered. Younger and more approachable, not as a rock star but as a father. Real families shared experiences defined their time together, not scripted moments or media appearances. Like any other parent-child vacationing in Disney World, they rode rides, laughed, and lived without the tension that had formerly marked their relationship. They also visited Montauk, where Pang and Lennon had started planning a Scottish-style home for themselves.
When Lennon returned to Yoko Ono in 1975, those intentions ended, but the memories stayed with everyone.
Later, Pang said she was delighted she was there for her father and son.
Rewriting Lennon's legacy was not her claim.
Merely to have softened one of its sharpest truths. Her romance with John ended, but her connection to his friends did not. One of the most unexpected friendships of that era was Pang and Cynthia Lennon.
Their difficult relationship did not lead to animosity later on. Pang praised Cynthia as someone she would do anything for.
They were friends for decades until Cynthia's 2015 death. Her bond with Julian survived. Julian acknowledged MayPang's influence on him long after the Lost Weekend and decades of inquiry. He used Pang's childhood photo on the cover of his 2022 album Jude as a symbol. A modest but profound recognition that her presence in his life went beyond hearsay and rumor. The image of innocence and healing from long ago was more than nostalgia. It was a modest confirmation that MayPang had restored something important despite her name controversy.
Today, Pang's tale is again in the forefront.
In The Lost Weekend, she re-examines her relationship with Lennon, formerly a sensationalized footnote. Instead of scandal, the April 13th video focuses on truth as she lived it, emphasizing ties rather than labels. In addition to the documentary, Pang has held picture exhibitions at City Winery in New York and Philadelphia, giving her personal archives for preservation.